Welcome to the Adult Learning Hour at Westminster Presbyterian Church for Sunday, January 17th. My name is Elona Simone Tyler, and I serve as Associate Pastor for Justice and Mission. Today, we are airing portions of a monthly online conversation hosted by ruling elder Elona Street-Stewart and teaching elder Gregory J. Bentley. Elona Street-Stewart and Gregory J. Bentley were elected to serve as co-moderators of the 224th General Assembly of the Presbyterian Church. They are committed to bringing good medicine to the church, that we would become a flourishing and vital expression of the ministries of Jesus Christ. To stir our hearts and imaginations, our co-moderators commend the concept of Sankofa from the Akan people of Ghana. Like the Sankofa bird, we are invited to look back to see forward. We go back and fetch the wisdom and learning from the past to ensure a strong future. Thank you for joining us. First, we listen to our co-moderators introduce Edgar Villanueva's book, Decolonizing Wealth, and discuss how the concept of decolonization will help PCUSA congregations join in God's redemptive and transformative work in the world.
Good morning, West Coast, and good early evening, everyone else. I'm Randy Hobson with the Office of the General Assembly, and we are so excited to start a monthly series here the second Wednesday of every month called Good Medicine with our new 224th General Assembly co-moderators. So first, we'd like to do some introduction. And we're going to talk with Elona Street-Stewart. If you guys want to tell us what good medicine is and what we hope to accomplish, we'd appreciate it.
Well, good morning, everyone. Gregory and I are thrilled to be the co-moderators of the 224th General Assembly and to be present with you in whatever ways possible now using technology during these next 2 years to really be part of what the Presbyterian Church is doing to be a witness to the wonderful ministries of Jesus Christ. And that means to be the good news wherever we are. And this is an opportunity for us to be able to say, as we connect with you and get to learn from you and to talk with you, we really want to bring good medicine to the people because it's time for us to bring healing out of our cultural traditions to be able to benefit the church and to help us be vital in our ministries. Gregory?
Yes, thank you, Sister. We, as Elona said, that we really, in a word, want to bring the best wisdom and practices of our respective communities to bring healing and wholeness to the church, that we might be strong and vital to join God in what God is doing in our world now. That's really it in a nutshell, and hopefully we'll be able to accomplish that through good medicine.
Well, you guys are well known throughout the church, leadership especially, but I'm sure everyone who has not met you or had the pleasure of working with each of you would like to know a little bit about you guys, what you did maybe before the election, and what you might envision happening over your term as co-moderators for the General Assembly.
Oh, well, it wouldn't be truthful if we said we lived quiet lives in the church, you know. Delaware nanny cook, and I have been raised to say whatever I've been given, I need to give back to strengthen my community. And so that's who I am, and that's what I've been doing before I became co-moderator.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. And thank you for all of your service to the community and the church.
Yes, yes.
And Mr. Moderator, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Not much to know. Just trying to do ministry here in these pandemic streets in Huntsville, Alabama. And trying to be a good husband to my wife, Diane, and a good father to my daughters, Miriam and Johari. Trying to be a positive presence in the community, to really have our ministry to be a good neighbor to our people here in North Alabama, to be light and salt in this place, and not just to do church stuff, but to weigh in on any mechanism, any entity that impacts the quality of people's lives. The church should have some say-so. It should have some impact or influence on all of the structures of society, especially those that have impact on the most vulnerable among us. And we have to be engaged in that to make them work for good.
Great. Well, I know that you guys are really excited, and we're really excited to get started talking about the book you've chosen for book study.
Yes.
And this is Edgar Villanueva, Decolonizing Wealth. And a lot of people are already familiar with the author and the subject, but fill us in on why you want to do this book and you know, and some of the plans that we have moving forward with it.
Right, well, I'll share with you that this book is really very important in this time where the church and our country are really trying to shift the realities around how we repair what has been raised to bring equity to our ideas, to resolve the concerns that are being raised by our communities and communities over. And the book is really based is that we believe will really help address these same issues that we're concerned about as a Matthew 25 church.
Yes.
I became acquainted with the book and with Edgar a couple of years ago when I was invited to join him in a Lenten series with the United Church of Christ called Sacred Conversations to End Racism. And at that time, we shared on this broadcast, you know, a call to righteousness by reclaiming our cultural identities as Native people, and then to be actively engaged in activities that would restore the brokenness. Our Native practices are that we are relatives to each other. Everything is in a relationship together, and it's these cultural experiences that we have from our wisdom keepers from the past that will help us survive in the future. So the author, Edgar, is a Lumbee Indian. They're from the southeast corner of North Carolina. It's a very poor rural area, and so similar to my people, the Delaware Nanticoke, up in Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia. He currently serves as the vice president of the Schott Foundation for Public Education, where he oversees grant investments and capacity building for education and justice.
I was first introduced to this book through a friend of mine and president of my seminary, the Interdenominational Theological Center in Atlanta, President Matthew Williams. He actually posted this book probably about a year ago. Might have been a year, a little less than that. And then when Elona brought it up, I said, oh, this is something we need to dive into, because these are two people whose opinion and perspective I really respect, and I haven't been disappointed. I think this is a real important book, and his perspective on philanthropy is really important to grasp as we move forward. It's one that I hope we take some time and crock pot. This is not a microwave project. We really need to let this crock pot a little bit. You know, a microwave is made for heating food up, but if you want to cook a good meal, you need to put it in a crock pot. And this is one of those crock pot projects that we need to engage.
And so in the book, he begins to say that philanthropy itself and talking about money aren't things that we need to shy away from. That the root of philanthropy is around the love of people. That's the root of the word. And that money itself should be seen as a way for us to engage across the differences so that we build relationships with each other. But, he's very clear that unfortunately, there's been a hierarchy of being able to say who benefits from wealth and who doesn't. And so early on in the book, he identifies a couple of things that philanthropy has mirrored or reflected colonial practices. And that in the midst of that, the reality is today that people are poor, needy, and disadvantaged because of this unjust hierarchy of who is to benefit and who sacrifices. And just quickly, he says, 92% of foundations their CEOs are white, 89% of the boards of them are white. The financial services in this country, over 80% of those are all white. Venture capitalists at 86% are white. And angel investors are 96% white. And that only 7 to 8% of foundation funding goes to Black, Indigenous, or people of color. And on the receiving side, loans are often denied at 42% times more to minority-owned businesses compared to just 16% of white-owned firms. And because wealth was extracted and made possible from the resources of particularly Black and Indigenous people, decolonizing means that we need to close this racial wealth gap. And he makes it clear that poverty is the product of public policy and exploitation facilitated by white supremacy. I mean, he lays it all out so clear. And for us, I think in the church, we need to say, so what do these averages look like? What do these numbers really mean to us? Because our own church members fall into all those categories of people. And so when we're talking about being responsible as providing good news for the world, we need to be able to say, what are we doing to close these gaps and alter, contradict, and interrupt the inequities? And that because of these gaps, we have hurt people. People have been hurt for not just 5-10 years, but a very long time. And so what he says is out of our native practices is that whatever we received, we need to give back. You hear about, potlatch, that's where it came from, native traditions, being able to share your wealth or whatever you have with your community. And so he offers this book as a way how we heal ourselves by being able to look at money and treating it as medicine. It's a way to achieve balance. It's not just a financial matter, or for medicine, it's not just about illness. It's really about choosing to have greater balance.
Yes, no doubt. One of the things that caught my attention that the author said was in a podcast, Leading from the Inside Out. And he said that he learned philanthropy from his mother. Now, some people would think, that's kind of counterintuitive. He talks about growing up in poverty and the strain and stress that they had on their material resources. But when we think about philanthropy, I think we have to broaden our understanding of it. It's really about generosity. It's about extravagant generosity. And he learned that from his mother. And I can relate to that myself because, outside of Jesus, my grandmother was probably the biggest influence on my life, who really taught me I don't know if you remember that book. They said everything I learned in kindergarten. The most important
Right.
stuff that I learned in life, I learned from my grandmother. So that was really poignant. That I think when we think through about how to inculcate philanthropy, the love of humanity, that I think about what Jesus said, that charity starts at home and then it spreads abroad, and his life is a definite testament to that. That we learn these things not in the halls of academia, but we learn them in our homes and churches, in our communities, and the people who are closest to us. And his life story definitely bears that out.
Mhm. And that's why, again, this symbol behind Gregory and I, the Sankofa, with her feet in the Mississippi River,
Yeah.
it's for us to be able to say our home or our people have so much to offer in order for all kinds of communities to thrive and survive in the future. And so we need to be able to look back to our indigenous and African roots and say,
Yes.
what wisdom do they have for us that we need to carry forward? And so again, it's this possibility of looking at decolonizing wealth that will be, I think, a lesson in the church about how to really open ourselves up to truth and to realize that it's all about healing. It isn't so much, again, about just directly the finances. That the conversation about reparation has been one that's been, considered throughout the church for a very long time. But the resistance about talking about reparations, tends to be specifically when you only think about it in terms of money. But we know that there are other possibilities if we're really wanting to talk about healing to restore balance. And so, Gregory, would you, want to share maybe the 7 steps to healing, if you have those in front of you, if you could share those?
Yes, in fact, when I read them, I thought about when our six R's of remembrance, remorse, repentance, repair, reconciliation, and resurrection. I thought there was a real good resonance between those and what he enumerates in the book, and he talks about 7 steps to engage in healing, and they are briefly to grieve, to stop and feel the hurt of what we've endured collectively. As a nation, we've never grieved the original sins of this nation. We've never grieved the genocide of the indigenous people and the enslavement of Africans, both of which are the foundation of the tremendous wealth of this nation and America becoming a so-called superpower. We never stop to grieve. And then once we grieve, don't stop at grief. He talks about to apologize, to feel sorry, to say we were wrong for doing this, and to have a sincere apology, and then to listen, to acknowledge the wisdom of the excluded and exploited by the system, just like my sister talked about earlier, that we are not a deficit people, that we bring great gifts and talents and resources to the healing of not only the PCUSA, but of the world. So sometimes, when you are materially affluent, it's hard to hear that from people who are not as materially affluent. So it really takes some effort and discipline to listen to indigenous wisdom. And then after listening, he says we need to learn how to relate, share, and understand. We don't have to, agree on everything, but we need to cultivate a climate of mutual respect, that everybody who's at the table is bringing something that is worthy of serious consideration. And then represent. It says to build a whole new decision-making table rather than rearrange seats. That's important. We don't just want to rearrange deck chairs on the Titanic, but we need a whole new way of being at the table together, where we can make decisions that will bring life and not death. And then he moves from representation to investment. Put our money where our values are. It's a common saying in our congregations. We talk about this during stewardship season, that money follows mission. And in this case, money needs to follow our values. What we say we are and who we say we are and what we represent, we should invest in that how we allocate resources should reflect those priorities and values. And then repair. Use money to heal people hurt and to stop more hurting from happening. So we want to use, it's not just about, issuing money out, but how do we heal not only the material hurt, but the psychic damage that has been done intergenerationally, that we have the capacity to really make a difference in that area. And I believe if we really take these 7 steps seriously, we could really see a measurable difference in terms of the condition of the most vulnerable among us.
Mm-hmm. And when we move to repair, I think it's really important that we understand how this conversation about creating balance and reparation has evolved. So it's not just repairing from the past injustices.
Yes.
But it's the ongoing injustices that we need to repair. And that's where we, Gregory and I, as we go out and visit in the church, we want people to address, it's not just you observing and learning like from a museum about the past injustices. It's really understanding how to engage and interrupt and correct what's going on now. And in the book, but also in other conversations that are all over the church right now. Let's talk about what's contemporary. What are we living in right now? And
next, our co-moderators discuss decolonizing our consciousness with Reverend Jim Bear Jacobs.
So we've invited you today to talk with us about what it really might take if we were to colonize our consciousness. And so we're just wanting an open conversation with you about, how would you use your imagination in being able to see a time and a place, because we're land-based people, around decolonizing our consciousness?
Yeah, that is that is a question in which the language to frame that question comes a whole lot easier than the praxis of how to carry that out. But one of the things I've noticed, and this is a teaching I've done in a number of churches around where I'm invited, is in terms of decolonizing our consciousness, I think it requires us, as Christians, as people of faith, to begin re-examining the stories that we hold sacred from Scripture, and really beginning to ask, okay, how has the lens of colonization influenced how I read these stories and how I understand them? And one of the things that is important to understand is in the dominant society, we are socialized into thinking of things in straight lines. And we do this all the time, and we do this subconsciously. But the world, the created world, does not operate in straight lines. It is circular. And so one of the ways I point this out is, we have, your show is called Good Medicine, and we as Indigenous people, we have the symbol of the medicine wheel. And there are many teachings of the medicine wheel, but it basically, one of its primary functions is to serve to point to the 4 directions. And so I'll ask people, what are those 4 directions? And they will say, well, those directions are north, south, east, and west. And I'll tell them, well, you're close, but you're absolutely wrong, because the directions are not north, south, east, and west. The directions are east, south, west, and north. The directions move in a circle. And this is something that's at first is difficult for people to understand, because we're saying the same words just in a different order. But the reality is north, south, east, and west represents a mindset that I call linear and oppositional. And so north is in a line with south and east is in a line with west, and they are opposites of each other. And we translate and we interpret this opposition into everything we do. So we wrongly assume that sunset is the opposite of sunrise, and we wrongly assume that high tide is the opposite of low tide, and we carry that into personal things. We wrongly assume that male or masculinity is the opposite of female or femininity. And as we know, Elona, the world does not operate in opposition, and the world does not operate in these straight lines, but these are circles. And so sunrise is not the opposite of sunset, but they are two parts of a circle that complete a day. And when we bring it to our, to the personal, male or masculinity is not the opposite of female or femininity, but they are parts of a whole that complete a whole identity. And when we start to look through an indigenous lens, our holy scriptures can take on an incredibly new and I think correct understanding and meaning as we do this. But it requires that indigenous knowledge and that indigenous perspective. And so what I tell a whole lot of white people is I tell them, stop bringing your Bible to me and telling me what it says. And by me, I mean indigenous peoples collectively. And what I tell them is, I say, instead, bring your Bible to me and ask me what it says. Because we as indigenous people, we retain this pre-colonial understanding.
Yes.
And so we can read scripture apart from the power systems and power structures that have been laid upon it really since the time of Constantine, at least, if not before that. We retain the memory of when the spiritual and the political were separate entities altogether, and they would not intertwine. And we retain that knowledge, and we can guide you in how to read your own stories in an appropriate, in a good, and a healing way.
Reverend, I really appreciate you lifting up how making these subtle semantic shifts have really major impact and make a big difference in terms of how we show up in the world, especially moving from duality to complementarity. That's especially helpful to me. You mentioned sacred sites. I would love for you to give us a perspective, a native perspective on Mount Rushmore, which is a national sacred site, but it was sacred to indigenous people way before America came into being. So I would love for you to give us an indigenous perspective on that site.
Your question kind of cut in and out. Can you give me a quick synopsis of the question?
Oh, sure. I was saying
I didn't hear.
Okay, be glad to. You mentioned sacred sites. I would love for you to give us an indigenous perspective on Mount Rushmore.
Oh, wow. Yeah. It's really interesting. Mount Rushmore sits in the heart of the Garden of Eden for the Lakota people of the Western Dakotas. And you have this I don't think there's another way to put it. You have this abomination,
Absolutely.
and you know, the reality is there were faces in that mountain before the artists and the carvers ever took over and started doing it. If you've ever gone to the Black Hills or Mount Rushmore itself, you know, that space, that mountain was known as the Mountain of the Six Grandfathers, because prior to the 4 presidential phases, if you've seen the pictures of what that mountain looked like beforehand, it doesn't take too big of an imagination to see 6 individual faces in that mountain. And the reality is, you know, the Black Hills are a space that the United States Supreme Court have ruled that they were illegally stolen from the Lakota people. So that is a Supreme Court case that they declared that the Black Hills were stolen. It was a violation of the treaty, and it's still a violation of the treaty for white people to occupy that space. The Wind Cave, which is the place of creation for the Lakota people, is in close proximity to where Mount Rushmore is right now. And then you have these 4 faces that are carved into this, and the reality is none of those presidents were heroes for Native peoples. They were very villainous. You know, Roosevelt is probably the least detrimental to Native peoples, but it was under the Roosevelt administration that so many Native people, we lost vast portions of our land under the National Parks Act, and creating these national parks. So none of those men memorialized on that sacred mountain have done anything for Native people. And it really is, it's, you know, I've been there a handful of times, and I've led groups of people out there to hear some of this story and that. And the reality is it's not a good feeling for myself as a Native person to go there. Yeah, it really is. It's sad to go there. I mean, I've even been there like on the 4th of July, and
with the fireworks.
and it is such a celebration of nationalism and patriotism. And you know, the reality is you know, that narrative being lifted up came at the cost of indigenous peoples, or the merciless Indian savages, as our Declaration of Independence codifies our people into official language.
Thank you. I raised that because as a Black man, you know, I think about one of the greatest scholars of the 21st century, W.B. Du Bois, who talked about this double consciousness. Am I an African or am I an American? And sometimes we, you know, as Black people focus so much on our Americanness, we don't see how it's damaging to the people who were originally here. What does that say to go to that place and celebrate these 4 men when it is their elevation is based on the literal depth and theft of the people who were here?
Right.
I just think we need to really be more thoughtful about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And wasn't it Du Bois who gave that speech? What is the 4th of July to a Black man?
Frederick Douglass.
I'm sorry. Yeah, Frederick Douglass. That speech is an incredible indictment.
Yes, it is.
Of the nationalism in this country.
Still rings true.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the recognitions I'm being made aware of now is that many Native elders are addressing this issue of decolonization. And we had an event at Wakan Tipi here a couple of weeks ago, and one of the elders that was invited to speak, talked about taking these words, even when the approach to using them is to restore and repair the wisdom keeper role. But at the same time, she said, but we have to stop using the colonizing language to redefine decolonization. She said, we really need to step as soon as we can into our native languages to define what it would mean to decolonize.
Mhm.
And an example that has come up over and over is Avatar. That often majority people will assume that to decolonize means to just simply deconstruct society, but have a little big man, a white man, come in and save the future with your people doing all the fighting still.
Right.
And that the whole concept of Avatar is an antonym to what we also want around decolonizing. So would you have any comments about that? Because I thought her expression of being able to grasp something that people saw, that, there was this other world, and can we get back to that? But do we do it through the technology of white people, and meaning literally the language and the symbols of the dominant language of the colonial settlers? So.
Yeah, that's a very deep, a deep thought, because on one hand, you're talking about the language and the symbols of the colonizer, and that brings into mind like the consciousness and just the worldview that we as Native people, I don't ever say we as Native people have not been affected by colonization, or that we are not colonized. As Native people, colonization has its fingerprints upon us. The difference for Native people in a path forward to decolonize is our bodies still retain the memory, and our spirits still recognize the songs that call to mind a time prior to colonization.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also, right, like a very practical thing too, like you say stop using the language of the colonizer, and the first thing I think of is literally the Dakota Ojibwe language projects here that are going all over the state
everywhere.
of Minnesota. And Elona, I had a holy moment a couple of years ago when I was giving a sacred sites tour, and I was down at Bedote, which is an area that it holds the Dakota creation story, but it also holds a deep story of trauma and genocide, as the Dakota people were very nearly, they were placed in a concentration camp
Right.
On that site, and they were very nearly eliminated. And I was telling the story, and up the path came 3 little grandmas and about 7 little kids that came from, they either came from Cheyenne River or Standing Rock, I can't remember, but they were Dakota descendants. And I sat there, and during a break, one of the little girls, she was 9 years old, and I remember this because she's the same age as my daughter, so she was 9 years old at the time. And she sat there and she told me how much she loved going to school because she was learning her language in her school. And she just sat there and very proudly, unprompted, she just very proudly said, I know how to count to 10 in Dakota. And she just proceeded right there to rattle off the numbers in 10 in Dakota. And I thanked her. I said it was beautiful. And I turned around and I just openly wept, because to be in that place that was the colonizers were using that place to try and eliminate and snuff out all that was beautiful about Dakota people, and to have this 9-year-old little girl speak that language in that place again was a holy moment for me.
Brother Jacobs, thank you. Thank you for firing our imagination about what is possible and the work that we have ahead of us. It is hard and arduous work, and work that we reflexively recoil against, because it goes against not just decades, but centuries of conditioning. So we really have to be intentional about wading through that. But thank you for showing us the way forward, and that the work and even the pain and unpleasantness of it is worth it to get well and get whole. Thank you.
And I would just close with saying one of the great values across many tribal nations is a value of reciprocity. So when we're talking about decolonizing, it really is to get into that circle of understanding of what you have received becomes what you give, your gratitude becomes an acceptance. It again flows in that circle, which is so wonderful. And we do always need to talk about, this reciprocity for everything that we've been given, because we're part of a whole. We're just, with all of our relatives, two-legged and four-legged, there's life, spirit, and everything. And so how can we, in decolonizing our consciousness, be much more aware of our place? So thank you.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And our co-moderators discuss decolonizing our congregations with Reverend Daniel Wolpert.
You touched on the issue of, biblical hermeneutics, and that seems to be one of the main ways, or one of the main things that have been colonized in terms of how we approach and interpret the Bible. I was thinking about something that the Reverend Dr. Alan Buzak said, the great South African theologian and activist. He said that, I read the Bible as the faithful witness of a people who are resisting empire. Because when you look at the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, that the people of Israel are dealing with some type of imperial presence, be it Egypt or Persia, Greece, Babylon, and the whole of the New Testament is written under Roman rule. It just makes a difference when you see it through that lens. And you mentioned that from the very beginning, how this turning over thing comes up. Could you speak a little bit more to the issue of how we interpret the Bible as a decolonizing?
Yeah. Well, right. I mean, and that's a perfect example. And I was incredibly fortunate to have Dr. Bozak as one of my preaching professors in seminary. And, it was amazing. And I had been very involved in the anti-apartheid movement when I was in college and trying to get the University of California to divest from the South African regime. And it was amazing to go to do some research, to go into the library and look at white South African theological tracts and Black South African theological tracts. And you would think, written at exactly the same time, and you would think that they were in different universes. It was really remarkable, right? And the white tracts were all about, let's discuss the homoousios and, what does the Trinity look like? And let's talk about this Greek philosophy. And the Black South Africans were like, we're dying in the streets and we need to talk about that. And Jesus is actually interested in that, right? So You know, so exactly. I mean, if you are the dominant, if you are part of the dominant class of a society, you are going to read something like the Bible, and you're not going to see, oh, you know, to put it in cartoon character terms, right? Like, who are the good guys and who are the bad guys, right? I mean, you know, the Babylonians or the Egyptians or the Romans, who am I in that story, right? And if I'm of the dominant class, I'm the Romans, right? Right. I mean, that's who I am in that story. I'm not the peasant on the street. I'm not the leper. I'm not the person being forced to farm pigs against their religion, and it's driving me insane. No, I'm the Roman legion that the pigs are for, you know. Like, I'm comfortable eating nice, you know, pork chops every night. Like, that's who I am in that story. And so that's this issue of what is my formation, what is my lens, how am I going to see things, what is my orientation in space and time, by which I am then going to interpret out of, because we interpret out of our position, and particularly out of our unconscious position.
So I thank you for, you know, recognizing that, right, Jesus is right there in the streets with people. And if we are to re-educate ourselves, then what would that message be? And what would the church look like in a new mode of operation? There are a couple of things I, you know, can think of right away. In all of the imagery around the Christmas pageantry right now, you know, how many churches will still have white-skinned angels, white-skinned Jesus, white-skinned Mary and Joseph? How many will emphasize the royalty of the Holy Family and not recognize them as an immigrant family or refugees? So that's one thing. Another is that in planning for the coming year, as churches are ordering their curriculum for their Christian education classes and equipping people to participate in various programs, are they thinking that, again, what colonization would be is that we're bringing everything we own and we know about the world into this other place so that it will become like us, rather than saying, you know, what will our plans be in, you know, March or during our, you know, 40 days of Lenten? You know, will we have a devotional that allows us to not take our church out there and try to have other people look like us so they'll be welcomed in our doors and they'll not be strangers, but so that we're actually going to experience what can we learn from the community around us? What is going on out here in my community at this time? And if I get in my car and I drive, you know, 10 miles, well, I notice the differences by zip code, you know, of neighborhoods and schools and shopping areas and people, you know, walking around, the kinds of transportation. Where does the freeway end? And if I go off onto a city street, you know, where's the closest grocery store? You know, again, it's just that becoming, re-educating our congregations to say it's not so much what you need to bring out to the world, it's what you need to learn, and then together say, you know, how can the vitality of this congregation really reflect the lifeblood of what's going on around us? Some of the changing of those biases, I think, would also be to say our communities are very diverse. And so, you know, as Native people, we always talk about the scourge that we've been dealt with is that we've been identified with a plight, you know, so it's always, you want to hear about or correct or help the plight of American Indians. You know, people just don't recognize that we are sovereign nations. We have our own governmental institutions, that right in your own neighborhood, even in suburban neighborhoods, there might be Native students in a classroom or some Native teachers. And so people have degrees. People are, you know, very mobile. they're traveling all across the country. They're, we have artists, we have professors, we have judges, we have lawyers, we have families that are, in poverty, but, we're a great mix of people. And so part of, I think, that decolonization would be, as I said, what can we see around us? It's not only, those who are, again, in situations where they are economically suppressed and oppressed, but that we have community, agency, not agencies, but we have community power and authority and history that says we've been problem solving, we've been leading our communities quite well. How can we recognize the power in the community that exists already and begin to see that we've been operating in a vacuum, that we need to share power around, with these discussions about what does the, gospel really mean? Can it be good medicine for people? As we, share what we know, we need to look at our communities and say, what do I need to learn from you? Because you've got, eons of experience. So, and Greg, I see you nodding your head.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right on it, Elona, that too often we assume this position that we have everything to offer you and you have nothing to offer us. I mean, that is a typical, Constantinian imperial colonizer consciousness.
I'd say it all.
I mean, that you're nothing until we make you something.
Right.
Rather than realizing that people bring tremendous gifts that are in fact good medicine for us. If we could let go of our own hubris to receive them. There's a book.